Live. This is a special edition of the show. First, we want to get into all of this reportage of the sex abuse crisis we've been reading about and hearing about, attacks and questions of just what Pope Benedict knew or didn't know, and his involvement in some of these cases. To help us unravel it all, we're joined by George Weigel. He is the papal biographer of Pope John Paul II, a distinguished senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and the author of the upcoming book, The End and the Beginning, focused on Pope John Paul II. Would you welcome George Weigel? George, thanks for being here.
Always good to be with you.
Let's put this in some context. We're hearing these terrible stories come out from all over the world. People are saying the Pope just doesn't get it. He hasn't apologized. It doesn't seem as if he's looking for the best interest of the victims, but is siding with protecting clerics and offending clerics. You would say what?
That's rubbish. That's nonsense and rubbish. No one in the senior leadership of the Catholic Church over the last decade has done more to deal with what he himself once called the filth inside the church than Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict XVI. The second thing, Raymond, that needs to be emphasized is that there is no sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church in the United States. Catholic Church in the United States is a community of 68 million people. There were 6 credible reports of the sexual abuse of an under 18-year-old in the church last year. That's 6 too many, 1 is too many. But amidst this global plague of the physical and sexual abuse of young people, the Catholic Church is the safest environment for young people in America today.
Most of the cases we're hearing about, these things are 20, 30, in some cases 50-plus years old.
That's true, and many of them were badly handled at the time. We have to concede that, and not concede it, we have to frankly admit it. But this Pope has said that, his predecessor said that, Benedict XVI has personally met with and apologized to the victims of sexual abuse here in the United States. And I believe his letter to the church in Ireland was stern, sharp, pastorally sensitive. The Pope telling Irish abuse victims that he can understand why the very thought of walking into a church repulses them today, while asking them to have faith in the healing power of the risen Christ.
And he pulled no punches in that statement. I mean, he talked about the errors of the church in focusing more on the image, the public image of the church, rather than what actually happened in these individual cases.
And this has not ended in Ireland as far as Benedict XVI is concerned. He is absolutely determined to do in Ireland what has been done here in the U.S. over the last 8 years, which is the problem has been solved. And people need to know that. The image that's being created of the Catholic Church as a global criminal conspiracy of sexual abusers and their abettors is a false image. You can demonstrate that empirically. But the image is being created to advance other agendas.
Right. I want to get into some of those agendas in a minute, both the attorneys who are behind a lot of this, and then there are those in the public sphere who consider the church a major obstacle to some of their utopian visions of society. We'll get into that. I want to talk about some of these specific cases which really brought this to the fore. The first was the case in Munich. The Pope was then Archbishop of Munich. There was this priest who was reassigned. One of his aides in the archdiocese has taken full responsibility for the reassignment. It appears all that then Archbishop Ratzinger did was allow this priest to go to treatment. That's all that the paper tells us. Your thoughts on that particular case and the media scrutiny and attention given to it?
I think that's what we know. And I'm predisposed to assume that the Archdiocese of Munich and the Holy See are telling us what they know to be the truth. So I don't think there's a there in terms of the narrative that the media is trying to create. I do think it would be helpful if the Archdiocese of Munich and the Holy See would put together a documented chronology of this case so that we can see step by step precisely what happened here. But I have every reason to believe that'll vindicate what has been said so far.
Let's talk about the Milwaukee case. In the case of Milwaukee, you have a priest who is accused, and we should say accused because this was handed over to local law enforcement. They dropped the case for whatever reason, the lack of evidence, the statute of limitations, whatever it was. This was then, a canonical trial was opened. The Vatican was informed of this in 1996. The canonical trial is opened in, what, 1998? And the priest dies before the trial is complete. The charge, leveled by the New York Times and Jeff Anderson, who's the attorney involved in a litigation here, and a source to the New York Times, they claim the Pope knew about this, then Cardinal Ratzinger knew about this case, and yet he stopped the canonical trial out of mercy to this priest, rather than mercy to the victims, stopped the trial to give the priest, let the priest die as a priest without stripping him of his priesthood. Your thoughts on this case?
This was an astonishingly tendentious and irresponsible piece of reporting by the New York Times. I've written about this at some length. Father Raymond de Souza did the entire Catholic world an enormous service by going through the 86 documents that the Times generously posted on its website, right, and showing how they did not support the storyline that the Times was putting forward. This priest had been suspended. He was not functioning publicly in the ministry. And the notion that Ratzinger intervened to give this guy a pass is just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. The sourcing on the story was remarkably sour. Archbishop Weigel, who did nothing about this man,
another source for this story,
for 15 years, is simply not a credible source because of his own failures to deal with these problems in Milwaukee, as well as other aspects of his biography that we need not dwell on. Right. That a plaintiff's attorney with a direct financial interest in the case, personal financial interest in the case, working on a contingent fee basis, is regarded as a credible source is simply incredible. So I think the Times really, really fouled its own credibility nest with that story, and I think that one has died, although in the way of these things, the sad fact is mud sticks. The narrative line that's been developed is twofold. It is one, to disempower, to disable, to cripple the Pope as an effective public moral witness in the world. And secondly, it's to create this impression in people's minds that the Church is, as I said a moment ago, a global criminal conspiracy of child abusers and their enablers, headquartered in the Vatican, such that any reasonable legal system, it is claimed, would be able to go after the Holy See seeking damages for the enabling or covering up of this abuse. This is a complete structure of falsehoods, but it's what's being sold right now. But what's happening here, Raymond, is a rollout strategy. In law schools today, law school professors tell me, students are taught, if you are a plaintiff's attorney and you don't have a particularly strong case, you can strengthen your case by ginning up a public campaign on behalf of your client, which will change the atmosphere for the jury, the judge, whatever the circumstance may be. That's what's going on here. This is a slow rollout in which, as you say, cases that have been settled years ago, in some cases decades ago, will be pawed over in order to keep alive this storyline of the global criminal conspiracy centered in the Vatican.
The constant shifting of tactics is really interesting as this, this entire storyline evolves.
But the tactical shifts are all in aid of the same strategic objective, namely paint the Church as a global criminal conspiracy of abusers and their abettors.
In a moment.
But it's also in aid of a secularist agenda. There is in Europe today, and indeed throughout the world, an extraordinarily aggressive form of Christophobia, as the Jewish constitutional lawyer, my friend Joseph Weiler, once described it. A profound hatred of Christianity because Christianity, and specifically the Catholic Church, is the last obstacle still standing on the chessboard to a sweep of the board by the forces of what Joseph Ratzinger once called the dictatorship of relativism. The marriage question is engaged here. The life issues are engaged here. This is all of a piece. Now, is there some vast international conspiracy to bring down the Catholic Church? No, I doubt that. But are there people with coordinated interests who see in each other's assault on the church support for their own agenda? I don't doubt that for a minute.
Do you think, stepping back for a moment, looking at the way this is playing out in the pop culture and in the media, this is a smear campaign against the Pope. Does that defense work? Is it effective?
I have no idea whether it's effective. I do have some confidence in people's innate sense of fairness. In the Philadelphia Inquirer on Easter Sunday, I had a column in which, among other things, I said the cartooning, editorial cartooning about the Pope and the Church over the past 2 weeks, was looking perilously like the kind of cartooning one found in the 1930s in Nazi Germany in its attack on the church. The same images, the mitre turned into a crocodile, the gay, homosexually predatory clergy.
Are you concerned about the way this is being reported totally out of context? I mean, you would imagine that 40%, 50% of the clergy were guilty or accused of sex abuse against minors. In fact, we're talking about 4% at the height of the thing.
Over a period of 50 years.
Exactly.
There were 290,000 students sexually abused in American public schools between 1991 and 2000. 290,000. That is orders of magnitude larger than the abuse in the church over a 50-year period. So when the church, which did have problems,
absolutely,
and they have been dealt with, when the church continues to be the obsessive focal point of news coverage on this, one has to say, look, what else is going on here? It's not, this is not just the facts, ma'am, Sergeant Joe Friday. Something else is afoot here. Now, having said that, now, we should, and now do, rigorously hold ourselves to a higher standard than we expect of others. But the fact that the New York Times has not seen fit to turn investigative reporters loose on why the New York State Legislature has been protecting public school teachers and their unions from abuse charges raises an interesting question. What are you guys really interested in here? Are you interested in protecting young people? Are you interested in destroying the moral credibility of the Catholics?
How do you get the church back to regain its moral voice and authority? It seems to me, you're quite right, the procedures have been put in place now that children are protected in the church and offenders don't go on and on and on and get shuffled around. That's true. But the moral voice of the church is seriously impeded as a result of this. How do you regain that moral standing and voice given the pop culture reportage and the emphasis on these crimes now?
Well, we have to keep speaking the truth in charity and with vigor and firmness. We have to tell our own story better. There's no global institution that does more for young people and children than the Catholic Church in terms of education, health care, foster care, etc. And we have to name anti-Catholic bias and bigotry for what it is. The attempt to drive the church out of the public square by painting it as a hypocritical global criminal conspiracy of sexual predators and their abettors has to be challenged. And I think we do that both through our own media, by trying to be as present as we can in the general media, and by getting on with the great service that the church provides to children and young people throughout the world.
Very good. George Weigel will continue to read your words and listen to what you have to say on this and many other matters. Weigel.